Today's guest is a man of many hats. He's a dad, a comedian, an actor you've seen in a million things, including the amazingly fun documentary centered in our home state, Class Action Park, the host of podcasts Beautiful Anonymous and New Jersey is the World, and author of many books, including the new Dad on Pills, Fatherhood and Mental Illness, out now. Welcome, Chris Gethard. You, Chris, are a man of many, many talents. Can you give us a rundown of all the zillions of things you do?
Like, what does it say on your special skills on your resume? That's the first part.
Well, I feel like I love that you listed dad and comedian as my first two credits because those are kind of the two that I stand by the hardest these days.
Oh, good.
I've always, dad now trumps everything. Comedy is kind of the broad umbrella, but I think a lot of comedy fans would say I've always sort of done some confounding stuff in terms of like fitting into a box. So I used to host a TV show that started out as a public access show. My podcast, Beautiful Anonymous, is not always funny, but it all kind of generally lands under the range of comedy. So I do a lot of writing, performing, and I think my career, acting as well as on The Office and Broad City and some other shows in these small parts. So I kind of do a lot of stuff. I think if I was able to say, like, here's what I do in a succinct way, my career would probably be a lot better. And I think I'd be more of a mainstream entity after 2 decades of doing it. But I'm just kind of somebody who works under the broad umbrella of comedy and then does a lot of writing and performing and figuring stuff out, but always just sort of like whatever feels most interesting at the time and stuff that feels personal to me and kind of comes from a place of caring about it.
As someone who has suffered from anxiety and depression her entire life, dad's a therapist, so why not just, have that? I relate very much to this idea of doing a lot of different things. I mean, I think that in the beginning of my therapy journey, which was 35, 40 years ago, I realized that I was doing a lot of these things to run away from dealing with the feelings that I was having. And now I've dealt with the feelings I'm having, but I still just like to be that productive.
It's creativity. It's harnessing all, for me, it's like when I feel these things, because, we are all on the same bus here with the anxiety and all of that. And for me, with doing all of these things, it's almost like a way to harness this creativity and these feelings and into a project almost. Is that kind of what it is for you? I mean, you just seem so creative to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think on its best days, me being a creative person has been taking energy that probably would wind up being mania and directing it towards something productive, setting some parameters where it's not just like out of control, and it gives my life some guideposts. On its worst days, I'm probably chasing dopamine rushes. I'm probably chasing external validation, all these other things that tie into the negative side of my mental health. So I actually started doing comedy in New York, like a solid 2 to 3 years before I started therapy. And I can look back on that stretch and realize, oh, I thought that creative achievement was going to solve a lot of my problems. It turned out it did not, and that's not what it's for.
Usually worse. It also sometimes worsens it. I had that experience, my thing where I was like reached all the goals I wanted to in my acting career. And I was like, whoa, I'm more depressed than ever. And now I'm depressed extra because I thought this was going to fix it. And it obviously didn't.
Well, it's especially like when I was like 19, 20 years old and I'd take the train from New Brunswick up to Manhattan and I'd get on a stage and I'd crush and I'd feel like I had like this superpower. Then I'd go back to Rutgers and it was like the high of going on stage in Manhattan and actually surviving and at times thriving would feel so good and like such this adrenaline rush. And then I'd go back to New Brunswick and nobody would know I had done that. And I'd feel even more depressed. Like the highs were getting higher, but that meant the lows were getting lower. And it took me a few years to realize that was a very, very dangerous game to play. That like chasing a high, you can't always live in the high, right? And like you said, like you set these major goals for yourself. And I know that feeling really well where you go, oh, I always figured if I got blank, I would feel validated. And that internal chatter of not being good enough would go away. those feelings of just waking up feeling horrible, I'd go, oh, well, someday if you can wind up on a TV show, then you won't feel so bad about yourself. And then what happens when you're on the TV show and you feel even worse about yourself?
And you're like, what the now?
I
Jesus,
know.
yeah.
It's like at some point, I think I might just need to admit that I'm a little broken internally, and none of the external stuff is going to fix that.
Judging by what you're saying and the fact that I had this conversation with my therapist last week, I would go ahead and say you are a man who has been through therapy.
I was aware that I probably needed therapy as far back as 12, 13 years old. Did the very, I was born in 1980s, so I was still of a generation where you hid that and you tried to be tough and you tried to fight through it, and went through all of high school and college sort of desperately avoiding it, and with problems really mounting, and then finally got into therapy. I was probably, I believe I was 22, 23, and I turned 42 this year, so it's been a major factor for half of my life. I finally started getting help, and then as a comedian, I started really talking about it publicly, which felt really notable for a number of years. Now I'm glad to say I put out an HBO special in 2017 that was all about this stuff, and it got a lot of press because I think a lot of people were like, whoa, this guy's really going there. Now, even 5 years later, I don't know that the stuff I talked about feels like it would have gotten as much press. And I think that's a really, really good thing, because even in the last half decade, I think that people are just going like, what can we do to tear down the idea that you need to hide mental illness, that you need to be ashamed of it, that it's stigmatized? It's one of the better social improvements, I think, from my childhood till now.
You have a son. How old is he? And how do you think fatherhood has changed you?
He turns 3 in April, and I think it's changed me immensely. I think at the end of the day, what it's done is it's adjusted all of my priorities in a way that I feel a lot better about. I was someone who would really fall into a trap where career all the time. Some of this being that I, work in a field where if you're not accomplishing something right now, you don't know if you're ever going to accomplish something again, right? Like if you are an actor or a comedian, you book a certain level of job and you don't maintain that consistency or that stature of job, it feels very much like you're failing. Um, I've really readjusted that. And so much is because I've realized, the pandemic also hit. You think about him being 2.5, so he was just about to turn 1 in March of 2020. He was born April 2019, and the silver lining for me was everything shut down in my industry. I got to spend so much time with him. I was there for his first steps. I was there for his first word.
I have a 3-year-old and Ashley is a 4-year-old. So that is something we talk about a lot, is how much time we've been able to spend truly in the same space as our child.
But for me, more specifically, because I was going to be spending a lot of that time with my son anyway, the biggest silver lining of COVID has been my husband. The amount of time that my husband has had with our son is incredible. I mean, I didn't have that as a kid. I don't think most of us had that as a kid. Our dad wasn't around because he was working. Hopefully that's the reason why. Other people, I'm sure it's other things, but like, my husband and my son have like a real relationship, and that probably would not have been the case without COVID.
My wife said to me, mirror image of what you just said. She basically at some point pointed out to me. She goes, for as stressful as this has been, scary as it's been, trying to keep him safe while balancing the fact that he kind of doesn't trust people because he's been kept away from them for most of his experience. All this stuff. She goes, you and him have a friendship, and I don't think you would have had it. Because I'm lucky, my career is flexible, but still, just with stand up alone, I'm often gone Thursday, Friday, Saturday, just entirely. I'm often in the city doing shows. All that got taken away. And she pointed out, like, you and him have a friendship that I don't think you would have developed yet. And it reminded me of a conversation with my dad. I mean, so much of my life the past 3 years has been reconsidering the actions of my father. Things that I never understood, things that maybe frustrated me. And my dad's a great dad, but he was a workaholic. He'd be the first to tell you. He was not around a lot. There's been a very strange, funny thing where my dad will say things to my wife that he would never say to me. And he once said to her, one of my only regrets is I wish that I spent more time with my sons growing up. He'd never say that to me or my brother. Like, it just would never come out of his mouth. Um, and my wife said that about Cal and I having this friendship. And it made me realize I had a conversation with my dad only within the past year or two where at one point he talked about, I have an older brother, but whenever my parents moved, my dad would call me and I'd drive out from the city when I was living there and I'd help my dad move. And I'd always loved that. For some reason, like moving furniture and lifting boxes, I just have always enjoyed it. And my dad was like, yeah, I realized like your brother's fine with it, but like you were into it. And I always would call you. And I said, yeah. And I go, I have fond memories too, because I feel like when you guys were moving and you used to call me to come help out, I was like, that's the first time I remember feeling like I could kind of like let my guard down around you and like you and I were friendly, like having friend conversations. And my dad looked so hurt. He looked so hurt. And he was like, you were in your 20s. He was like, you were like in your mid 20s. I was like, yeah.
Thank God it happened at all. That's what I say when my dad's always like, I can't believe it. I'm like, listen, let's just be happy it happened at all.
Yeah, but I remember those were the first times where like he'd curse in front of me, where like we'd be carrying something heavy and he'd be like, "Ah, son of a," or like, or he'd like ask me. I remember one time moving and I'd been on a date the night before and I was all tired. He's like, "You're kind of worn out." I was like, "Yeah, I was out with a girl." He's like, "Oh yeah," and I was like, "Oh, we're having bro time." Me and my dad are having bro time. This has never happened, but I was my dad was the best. My dad was the best, but spent a lot of time being nervous around him as a kid. He was tired. Guy worked himself to the bone.
Yeah.
I didn't want to mess up, you know?
Did you feel nervous or tentative? Because I did about having a baby, knowing that my mental health and my family's mental health. I was so afraid for so long of carrying on that gene. And now I have a different feeling about it. Now I'm like, well, I might carry the gene, but I have tools now of how to deal with it and not deal with it, but thrive in it. And those tools I got from literally 30 years of therapy. And that's kind of what made me decide I could have a kid. Cause I was like, listen, my anxiety, my depression, my suicide attempts, whatever, have made me the person I am today. And I love me. I just wish I had the tools back then to be able to deal with it a little better the way that I do now. And that's what I want to impart to my kid.
It's exactly what this new book is all about is, the whole first section of the book is me talking about this birthing class I was in. And a lot of it is me like, making fun of the birthing class, frankly. And like, we're sitting on yoga balls and we're learning meditation techniques. And I'm like, pretty certain this is not the real experience of this. And here's this crazy, this other dad was acting crazy and this and that. And then it leads up to this moment that was really, really truthful where the teacher had us at one point sit down across from our partners, in my case, my wife, and say, just 3 things that you're hopeful about in terms of this kid and 3 things you're scared of. And the first words out of my mouth were, I am so scared he's going to wind up being like me, which is a miserable thing to say about your kid. And it was sad to say. And as I heard myself say it and watched my wife's face, I was just like, man, it's really true. Like, but the idea of this theoretical little human suffering in this way and feeling this loneliness that I know well and feeling this desperation that I know well, it's just like rocks me to my core. So I wrote this whole piece about how to reconcile that. And I'm no expert, and it's really just written from personal experience, and it's pretty funny, even though it's about something so dark. But
Well, if you're a funny person, I
Right.
think that you're
Everything's
saying
funny.
everything is funny.
but yeah, that's what the whole book's about. Is just kind of like that because I kind of looked around and said like, where is this conversation at? And I realized like I think especially for dads, like there's not much. There's not much about like dads are supposed to be the stoic ones historically, and like our generation was raised on like tough dads who accomplished stuff at work and set a good example. And I'm like, I don't really want to be that. Being that has driven me to the brink of death and madness. So how do I be a dad where I still feel like I'm checking all the boxes that I want to be? Where I'm like how do I embrace the fact that to survive, I've had to just become more vulnerable as a guy, that I've had to be more open about my problems, that I've had to admit my flaws and faults and failings. And how do I make those positives for my son and not negatives?
Well, Ashley talks about this all the
I
time.
was about to say, you really touched on something for me because as the mother, firstly, I'm an only child. So I didn't grow up around a lot of guys. I had my dad, who is to begin with a nice, sensitive man, and he
Mark is sensitive. I love Mark is so good.
yes, he's a very nice man. Um, but I feel a responsibility in raising a a white man now, and in teaching him it's okay to be sensitive, teaching him it's okay to have his feelings, to actually allow him to act out those feelings in a healthy, respectful of others way. It really is it's a task that I think about all the time, and we were talking about this yesterday, and there are some times where I'm like, it's okay for you to be upset. I know you're upset with me. I get it. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but that I'm doing what I have to do as your mother because that's my job to keep you safe. And then there are other times where he just is having a moody, sensitive day, and he just cries and cries, and I find myself being like, dude, relax. It's not worth all of this. And then I go down this spiral of, okay, was that the wrong thing? Did I just teach him that he shouldn't be crying? Like, what it's such a mind having a little boy at this point because I feel such an immense responsibility. Um and I think that's good, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we're all like nervous and confused about how to navigate this side of things is a sign of progress. And one of the things that I wrote in this piece is like, I think we are of the first age that really did start talking about this stuff openly with ourselves. And now I think we are starting to all realize, well, that also means we're going to be the first generation of parents that are having this conversation from a perspective where we help destigmatize the entire conversation. Partially, not completely, not for everybody, but way more than our youth. Like, I think that if my kid winds up seeing a shrink in elementary school, the other kids will not be making fun of him for it because a lot of them will be in the same boat. And I think if teachers overheard you making fun of a kid for seeing a shrink now, there'd be all kinds of meetings about that and your parents would be getting called. And I get that sense.
It's interesting being a parent now in so many, like, even when we talk about, like, someone will say, like, "Oh, Sebastian, do you have a girlfriend at school?" Or this, that, or the other. Or we'll talk about one day when we have a joke, we call it family bed, and that's when the three of us, me, my husband, my son, and then the dogs are in bed all together, and we're just chilling and relaxing. And we'll say, like, "Oh, Sebastian, we're gonna do family bed forever. You could just bring your wife in." And then I'll catch myself and be like, "Or your husband," or whatever the situation is. And you know, people older than us have issues with that. They'll be like, "Why are you putting those thoughts in his head?" And I'm like, "I'm not. I just want him to know that whatever the he is okay. He is accepted. He is loved." And our generation is offering that to our children. And I know that other people see that as, inventing, putting things in their head, but really, how lovely is it to grow up knowing that you're loved unconditionally as long as you don't kill somebody or do something horrible.
Or as my mom says, if you killed somebody,
I'd still love you.
there better have been a good reason. That's the only way because I was like, "Will you still love me?"
Right.
She's like, "Depends on how and why."
Right.
So yes.
You know what I mean.
Yes.
But it's how lucky our kids are to have that. I really truly believe in every way, from parents who talk about mental illness stigmas to being openly in therapy to seeking things out to letting them know they're accepted, whatever the hell path they go on in life. I mean, I really do think our kids are in a good place. Hey, before we stop recording, can you plug yourself? Tell everyone where to get your books, where all the things you want to promote.
All the shows, all the podcasts.
Go for it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm always chrisgeth.com, Chris Geth on Instagram, Chris Gethard on Twitter, and New Jersey is the World podcast, the Beautiful Anonymous podcast. And then as far as the book goes, you can actually, I don't understand their business model, but you can just go, if you go to try.scribd.com/Gethard60, they give you 2 months and you can just go get it for free. You can read it or listen to it. So yeah, it's a part of this thing called Scribd, which they've been very kind to me. And they're just like, just tell people to come sign up and listen for free. And so, I mean, it says right on the site, like unsubscribe anytime. So I'm like, I don't totally understand how you make money by telling people to just sign up, listen for free, and they're welcome to unsubscribe anytime. But you can go listen to it for free, and you might like it.
Nice.
And we're gonna have to come see your podcast taping live.
Oh yeah, I do that once a month in Asbury Park. Yeah, New Jersey is the World live, and I'm always doing comedy live too. I've because my son's not vaccinated, we canceled all my touring until May, but I've got like 20 cities coming up this year, and those are all at chrisgeth.com.